Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Prime Live. Now, my next guest is Anas Mustapha, who is Cage International's head of advocacy, and we will be speaking about Cage International application to deproscribe Hamas. Now, this evening, he will be speaking all about, the fact that they have filed an application to deproscribe Hamas in the UK, and this is going to actually help us in highlighting the devastating consequences of proscription laws on Muslim communities and activists who express their solidarity with Palestine. Assalamu alaikum, Anas. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime Live, and welcome.
Alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
Jazakallah so much. Now, Cage International has filed an application to deproscribe Hamas in the UK. Firstly, can you maybe explain what are proscription laws?
So, in the UK, according to the Terrorism Act 2000, the government has the power to list an organization as a terrorist organization. The consequence of that means that those organizations cannot be supported. Individuals cannot claim to be members of that organization. Meetings for that organization cannot be arranged. There can't be any support or glorification of its activities and actions and so on. And anything that can be interpreted as such, even if done recklessly so, meaning without the intention to actually support that organization, without any record or evidence suggesting that someone may have sympathies towards them, for example, could be punishable by up to 14 years in prison. So it's a very serious offense to violate in the United Kingdom. Now, Hamas was proscribed as an organization only back in 2021. Its military wing was proscribed much earlier, back in 2001. And the diplomatic sort of norms were that the political wing of the party was a legitimate organization that the British government and British citizens could engage with in their diplomatic efforts, discussing the occupation and the conflict in Palestine. But that has shifted drastically. So when Priti Patel, the former British Home Secretary, who was very closely aligned to the Zionist entity, having visited the occupied Palestine numerous times without ministerial approval, leading to her being forced to resign, ended up fulfilling the wishes of the Zionist lobby and proscribed the entirety of Hamas. This was a political move, and it was a very deliberate move to sort of allow the mass and broad targeting of the pro-Palestine and anti-genocide movement in the UK, because now the authorities have the excuse to say that any form of support for Palestine can be framed as support for terrorism. And that's the place where we find ourselves right now. And Cage's application is an attempt to redress that.
That's very important that you shared that with us. Can you just maybe also highlight a little bit more on the importance of for Cage International to file this deproscription application, and also just talk more about the systematic impact of proscription on free speech?
Yes, totally. So right now, nearly 2 years on since the genocide in Gaza has begun, since the 7th of October, there is a clear and systematic targeting of the pro-Palestine movement in the UK, from more mainstream elements to the more radical parts of the movement. They are all equally targeted, and targeted by counter-terrorism powers, which are inherently unjust and extreme powers. Also, they are inherently Islamophobic powers as well. So that's the situation we find ourselves in at the moment in the United Kingdom. And our application lists over 20 examples whereby doctors, nurses, engineers, even children as young as 8 have found themselves on the wrong side of the law because of their support for Palestine. Examples include, for example, doctors who have made drawings and artwork in support for Palestine, that being flagged as an issue of concern and perhaps support for terrorism. Activism online on X, or formerly known as Twitter, that also being framed as support for a proscribed organization. And similarly, kids in school who come to their schools with Palestine badges or perhaps Palestine jumpers or jackets or scarves like the keffiyeh or anything similar to that, have found themselves reprimanded and at times referred to Britain's counter-extremism and counter-terrorism sort of programs for children. So it's a very stark kind of situation that people find themselves in, and the application therefore is essentially arguing that because the British government has deliberately decided to proscribe Hamas, it's given itself the green card, so to say, to target an entire movement. So it's not specifically about whether someone aligns with or agrees with Hamas or not, but it's simply saying that if we can no longer speak so freely about the Palestinian issue and about one of the most the largest and perhaps most influential groups in Palestine, then that means that there is an attempt to silence the debate on Palestine in the UK, and that's what the application is trying to overturn.
Definitely, I think that's a systematic approach that they took to make sure that they actually silence activists for Palestine. But this application is being filed on behalf of communities and individuals that are impacted by this proscription laws. Can you maybe detail some of the 24 cases that the application also documents and how their lives have been impacted?
Yeah, so one of the cases is of a teacher. She's a teacher at a school, working normally. Her husband was very active in the Palestine scene. He was arrested under counter-terrorism powers, and as a result, she had to inform her school, and her school said there should be no issues. You're not under any investigation. But very quickly that all turned, and she found herself suspended and found herself under investigation herself. And there are examples of teachers, for example, of doctors who had been involved in pro-Palestine activism online, and that had been flagged by either colleagues or some Zionist networks here in the UK, and that led to investigations and allegations that they had been openly supporting acts of terror because they supported the Palestinians' right to resist Israeli aggression and genocide. And it's these sort of, whilst not every single case has led to an arrest and has led to a prosecution, in fact very few so far, but that's not the intended consequence. The consequence is not to mass arrest and mass incarcerate an entire movement, but it's to target enough of those movements and to put at risk their professional lives, their careers, in such a way just for simple sort of advocacy and simple campaigning and maybe perhaps joining protests and whatnot for the Palestinian issue, and to make that become an unfavorable choice for so many people. And those are the examples that are outlined in the case. There, for example, there are foreign students who had been studying in prestigious universities in the UK, who because of their advocacy for Palestine had their visas revoked, and the allegation was said that their presence in the UK is no longer conducive to the public good. And obviously politicians define what this public good is. So for them, public good is, if you oppose Israel, then you're not an upright citizen, for example. And they've had their visas revoked. We've had professors, researchers who'd been in the UK working and left the UK for a short trip. On their return, they were told that they no longer had the right to remain and to work in the United Kingdom. And again, that's because they were involved in some pro-Palestine work and they were sharing materials amongst their networks. So these are the types of examples that you'll find in our report. And as I said, there's over 20 examples which people can go into our website, cage.ngo, and read the entire application and have a detailed look at them.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now, the press statement issued by Cage International also states that proscription disproportionately impacts Muslim communities in the UK. How is this so, and how does this tie in with the broader anti-terror legislation in the UK?
Yeah, so Cage was set up initially to focus on the violations of due process and rule of law when it comes to how counterterrorism powers are applied. And over that period of 2 decades, we've realized, and it's been evidenced repeatedly, that those who are disproportionately targeted by these powers happen to be minorities and happen to be Muslims in particular. And the case is no different here as well when it comes to the pro-Palestine activism. The Muslims are disproportionately targeted, and that's why one of the core arguments in our application to remove the prescription for Hamas is that the application of the law that has followed is applied in a discriminatory fashion, and it's clearly targeting Muslims in their expressions of support and solidarity with Palestine. That's the nature of how racism operates here in the UK, and that's the nature of how Islamophobia it manifests itself. It manifests itself in a slightly more clandestine way, in a way that it's codified in a certain way where it's made to be invisible, but its impact on the ground is very visible and very tangible. I mean, in over the last year we've dealt with, or the last 2 years, we've dealt with in excess of 600 cases. The vast majority of them dealing with Palestine issues, and the majority of those, overwhelming majority of those, are all Muslims. Not exclusively so. There's a large number of non-Muslims as well, which find themselves on the wrong side of the law, or of the state rather, on the issue of Palestine. But Muslims disproportionately as a minority find themselves victims.
Now, what does Cage International hope to achieve from this application, and what happens if this fails?
So the aim is to carve out a space in the public discussion for people to be able to debate these sensitive matters regarding Palestine, to debate the Palestinians, their right to resist Israeli aggression and occupation, to debate the existence of these groups like Hamas and others. And to talk about the Israel more frankly and more openly. And the benefit of this is that these types of discussions that we're having right now, we need to create more spaces for this, and we need to broaden the legal thresholds that enable these discussions, and that's to counteract the effects and the attempts of the Israeli lobby, or the pro-Israel lobby, to silence and to clamp down on voices that are supportive of Palestine. So as they seek to, for example, end careers and close down channels and hinder crucial work for Palestine. Yes. Sorry. And hinder crucial work for Palestine. Sorry about that. Yeah. So as they seek to hinder crucial work for Palestine, we must also create the spaces to allow it to grow naturally and to develop.
Now, almost 2 years into the Gaza genocide, what is Cage International's message to activists globally who may be facing backlash for raising the issue?
I think we need to put in perspective what's going on. The genocide that's happening right now is unprecedented, even historically speaking, and we must exert all efforts to push back against it and to end it. Currently, there is a systematic starvation of the people in Gaza. There are countless efforts that have been happening. We've heard that the Freedom Flotilla, Madeleine, sort of a ship that was intercepted and kidnapped by the Israeli authorities. There's currently a land convoy going through North Africa to Rafah to protest the closure of the border crossing. Every single thing that we can possibly do to alleviate the situation of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, we must do that. And the consequences that we face, they pale into insignificance when we see the death and destruction that's happening in Gaza. In the UK, people are joining direct action movements. They are dismantling Israeli arms factories. Other people are disrupting events and functions by Israeli politicians and war criminals. And people are involved in BDS campaigning. And there's so much more that's happening, but so much more must be done on all fronts, whether it's in the social front, whether it's in economic boycotting, whether it's in the academic fields, and whether, as now as we're discussing, in the legal fields. Every effort must be exhausted to ensure that Israel is isolated and to ensure that the people in Palestine and Gaza are free and liberated.
Now, Anas, thank you so much for joining us and just for giving us more insight on the Cage International application to deproscribe Hamas and, the efforts that you guys are putting in to make sure that, you are granted, obviously, free speech and activists are, allowed to support Palestinians, and you are able to show, support and just advocate for Palestine publicly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Viewers at home, that was my interview with Anas Mustapha, Cage International's head of advocacy, and he was just shedding light on the Cage International application to deproscribe Hamas. I hope that left you well informed, but most importantly, it gave you more courage to continue standing up for the people of Palestine, regardless of the circumstance. But without wasting any time, let's go to a quick ad break. We'll see you right after that.